setting aside everything,
Mm-hmm.
as you look at yourself as a professional woman
Yeah.
in a professional workplace, and you've seen it both, you've been in both a major, large corporate structure, like I said before, and in a kind of an interesting, dynamic, fast-moving startup. If you look at, what I guess the easiest way to frame this is, what are some of the unique challenges that you feel you've
Mm-hmm.
experienced or you've witnessed with other women? What do you experience? What do women experience today, at least from your experience, that really is unique? It's not something that a lot of men can maybe relate to.
Yeah. I will challenge to say that men might not experience this, because they might. But I think in my experience, there's kind of three areas to me that have always in my life kind of impacted me, and I think have disproportionately impacted me because I'm a woman, and then a woman of color. And it's title, pay, and communication, right? It's those three things. So, pay, it's the best advice I can give. And again, I don't have this perfectly right. And I continue to actually be inspired by a lot of the younger people coming into the workforce who seem to have a lot more courage in asking for what they want and asking for their worth than myself or my peers. So I give kudos a lot to like the younger generation coming in, but it's to know your worth. And, I make this mistake. I have made this mistake in my past before, of not, you shouldn't always be looking for the next best thing, right? Like the grass is not always greener on the other side, but there is value in knowing your market worth. And there is value in knowing what is happening in the professional world around you. And you can do that through mentors. You can do that through having an executive recruiter. You could do that through an executive coach, or just keeping your pulse on your industry, but knowing your worth and not being afraid to ask for it. And I think, again, I still to date struggle prepping. My husband will prep me for every single promotion pay conversation that I have to have, because I'll talk myself out, be like, well, I could understand why he wouldn't want to do that. I could understand, and we talk ourselves out of it. And
how do you approach those conversations with a boss?
Yeah.
I mean, because we get this so often.
Sure.
My colleagues, we're always getting this question
Yeah.
of, I feel they're, the alum who's calling isn't upset. They just think, I don't really want to leave, but I don't feel like I'm compensated appropriately at the moment. I don't know how to even start the discussion. And we hear this particularly from women. How have you approached that conversation?
So I think confidence is one. And so for me, it's confidence and preparation. So the confidence piece comes in knowing the data, like knowing the information. Because for me, factual, what is somebody at my level with my experience worth in the market? If I were to leave here and go somewhere else, what is the salary that I would be offered? And what is the title I would be offered? And for me, when I'm armed, I don't like to walk into conversations like that, especially where you're not necessarily sure of the outcome, unless I feel like I have the facts in my back pocket. And so, and again, this is just my approach because of my personality, but so I do this a full data gathering, so, and again, you have to be careful because the professional world is very, very small, but whether it's asking friends of mine, I have a friend of mine that's an executive recruiter, so she's helped me, or gaining mentors who are kind of one step ahead of you where you want to go, or in companies that you want to be in, or in careers you want to be in. Gather information. There's no harm in knowing what your market worth is, because you should be asking for that. And your company should understand that you know what that is. They might not be able to get there right away, right? A small company like mine might not be able to make a huge jump financially, right? That might be challenged, but what is the path to get there? You want to see the path to get there.
So that's an interesting way to have the conversation, Adeela, here's what you're heading to, what you mentioned, just under the subtext here, is kind of you're approaching it in a way that recognizes that person, your boss or this organization. It's not that they don't want to pay you what your worth. There may be extenuating circumstances, and maybe can you work together?
Can we get
from
there?
what you're saying of how can we create a path?
Yeah. Because look, in bigger companies, there's more restrictions, right? There's bandwidths, there's title that is associated with this pay structure. So you can't walk into a conversation like that and ask for a $50,000 raise out of the blue. Like that's just not going to happen. You're setting yourself up for disappointment. So it's okay. So one, understanding like what is your ask? The thing I am now a mentor to people as well. And in conversations like this, I'll often ask like, well, what is it that you want? What do you want? And they can't articulate it, right? So you have to know what you want when you're going into a conversation where you're asking for something. Know what you want. You have to like really know this is what I want and this is why. To me, this is why is my facts. So this is why, here's like what the industry norm is for this role. Here are the things. So for me, it's not just like industry. It's here's what I've achieved in the year. Here's what my expectations were. Here I've out delivered or delivered beyond expectations or whatever it is. Right. So setting those, like I literally build like a case, like I build a case for myself. And I go as far as to like creating a one-pager. I've done that before. I've written bullets on a piece of paper. I'm very like academic when it comes to my approach to things like that, because my nature is to falter. My nature is to step back and be like, oh yeah, that's fair. I understand, or yeah, let's talk about it at another time. That would be my nature, because I can be very assertive in situations that don't have to do with myself, and it's hard. It's really hard for me to really have that same level of assertiveness unless I truly, truly have the data. Because then I feel like, well, like this is like as clean as day to me. Like I don't understand, right? So one, it's know your ask and like know what you actually want. But then I think there is a recognition of understanding the limitations of what you're asking for. So not everything is going to happen like overnight. And it's not going to maybe be the thing you get right away.
Adeela, when you're having this kind of conversation, do you acknowledge that early on or as part of the conversation, so you don't look too naive? You look like you're sort of trying to get on the same side of the desk?
I think it depends. I think there's a lot, one of my pieces of advice for women in general is always know your audience when you're communicating. And I think this is another one of those examples. You have to know your audience. So, my current boss is the type of person that if it's feeling like adversity or conflict, he shuts down, right? So it's very important for me to have him feel like I'm on the same page as him, right? So yes, in my approach, and it has worked for me even with other leaders, it's very much like, I understand that there might be limitations. Like I understand that this might be a build. Here's kind of what my end goal is. Here's where I am today. Like I want to build a path. Like how do we get there?
We see a path to get there.
Do you see it? Because let's acknowledge that we both agree that we need to get there. And then do you see it and how do we get there? To me, that's a much more approachable way than what I have seen often is like, I have another job offer and get me to this number. Yes, that might be necessary sometimes. Absolutely. Like if you've tried many things, you haven't gotten there, you get an offer, but here's what I tell women all the time, or people, if you walk in like that, you better be ready to go, because you have like, that could be a revolving door and you're on the other side of it. So, you don't ever walk in with a contingency or an ultimatum and you're not willing to take it, because that's like the worst mistake you could make. So, and I've never pulled that card personally, because I honestly think if you're there, it's too late. If you're at the point where you've already gotten an offer in hand, it's probably too late. You're already too far gone. You've already checked out. So you have to like address these things before you get to that point, or it's probably a little bit of a lost cause. So I do think there's an assertiveness. So pay for me is one. Title is another. And this is very interesting, because I've experienced this a lot in my career, where I'll either have a male boss or a founder or an investor kind of say to me like, oh, title doesn't matter. Like it's it doesn't matter. It's really like, what you do. And we all know, that what you do. And it's like, well, but it does matter. it does matter. Because it matters to the way I perceive myself. It matters to the way people perceive me. It matters to the external world. If I ever need to leave this company, it does matter. And I think we often, women especially, don't raise our hand for the title. Like we might be like, okay, if we get the pay and the title's not there, it's fine. Or, make concessions there. And I don't think that's an area that women should concede, because it is important, and it's important for the other women in the organization to see women in leadership roles in companies, because that gives them ambition. It gives them something to look forward to as well. And, again, I'm not proclaiming to have gotten this perfect, but I do think that oftentimes women are undertitled, and for the same work that they might do in comparison to an equally qualified male counterpart. And that's someplace that we should push. And again, I would approach it in a very similar way, with like facts in your back pocket. Make sure you're doing the job that you're asking the title for, if you're saying it's kind of retroactive to me, or that you're willing to do the job that you're asking the title for. But that's another area to me that I've had to experience a lot, and I've not always won the battle. And I've sometimes had to just kind of make do, and it's not been comfortable. And, it's not the greatest situation when you feel like you're because it makes you feel undervalued, and it makes you feel like, okay, you want me to do the work and you trust me to do the work, but you're not willing to give me the title. That tells me something. And it does. It absolutely should tell you something. And so I would say that, where possible, and again, in a smaller company, you actually might be able to do this easier because titles are a little bit more fluid. In bigger organizations, I think it's harder. And my personality would never be one that says, well, if you're not going to give me the title, I'm not going to do the work. That's just not the type of person I am. So then and I think one of the things we had maybe spoken about is like, when is the time to leave a company? Like, that's probably a time you want to start thinking about, is this the right place for me? And if that's a rub that you continually feel, because there is an inherent value disconnect there, if that's a hurdle that you can't overcome. And then the last is communication. And I think this is where and kind of in that very first story I told about feedback, where I have experienced it more often than not, my communication style can be direct and can be very to the point and blunt in some ways. And I could be sitting right next to a guy who speaks in exactly the same way, but we are perceived in two very, very different ways. Yeah. And, I think the greatest advice I could give is, I've never changed that about me. I've always been assertive. I'll continue to be assertive. I'll always be direct. I'll continue to be direct. But I do manage my communication style to my audience more, and I adjust. And I think this is one of the things I think that in my professional maturity I've become much more comfortable with, but I struggled with a lot early, is this concept of like being me, is what is this being me mean? And like, I feel like when I'm in this setting, I'm different than when I'm in this setting. I actually think that's normal, and I think that's okay. And I think it's okay to not present in the exact same way in every situation. And I actually think that is an art in communication and negotiation and getting to the outcomes that you want. Now, I'm not saying
have that flexibility.
Yeah, and I'm not saying be somebody you're not.
To that environment.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm not saying be somebody you're not. I'm not saying present an opinion or a thought that you don't have. But there are tweaks in the ways you can communicate and in the ways you can present your opinions that the recipient will hear it differently. Because at the end of the day, often my goal is I want to be heard, and so you need to probably speak in a way that that person can hear you. And that sounds different depending on who I'm speaking to. And I struggled with that a lot, because it did feel like, well, am I like changing who I am? Am I changing the person I am in these situations? And I don't feel that way anymore. I just feel like I've just become really good at reading my audiences, and I've become good at adjusting the way I communicate to who I'm communicating to.
The camera has a lot of lenses.
Exactly. And I think women can stand to do that better, because we don't recognize that that's okay, that it's okay to do that. There isn't just a one way to be. And I think men in general just do this better. Like they can exert themselves in different ways better than we can. And they put their hands up more often, and, closed mouths don't get fed. So I think in many ways, like, that's an area that I've grown and I've started to appreciate and accept and actually lean into, I would say, more and more as I have grown in my career. And the advice I would give to women is to be okay with that and learn how to do that really, really well.
Yeah. That's really, it's really good counsel. I like the idea of what you're talking about in terms of just the general picture here of know your audience, know what you want.
Yep.
Be prepared for these kind of encounters. If you know your audience, you'll know what you're walking into. You'll know what your objective is during that encounter, whether it's asking for a raise, a title, or just in a meeting. You know that you're going to have to sort of put on a certain persona. And it's not completely out of your character.
Right.
It's another window of your character, another dimension of your character. And that's what I'm taking from this as a summary. And I think it's something that what I like about your perspective on this, Adeela, is that it's actionable. That our other women alumni can take this with them and say, gee, these are 3 things I can think about and do.
Yeah.
And that's what's really great here. So
the last thing I would say there, just hearing you share it back, is I also think silence is golden sometimes. And I know I don't do this very well because I'm actually really uncomfortable in silence. And so sometimes I'll like talk through a situation, and I often talk myself out of it or talk somebody else out of it. But sometimes like speaking and then just saying nothing and waiting. And, and again, in situations like pay and title, where it is in a non-corporate environment, it's often very subjective. And you don't give somebody fodder to respond to you if you don't say anything. So sometimes it's sharing your ask and sharing what you want, and then just waiting for a response, because then you're responding versus like just trying to figure out what to say next. And that's actually a skill that I have learned from my husband, who does this exceptionally well. And we practice it. Like, I quite literally role play these conversations over and over and over, so I'm prepared. Because again, I think I, maybe like many women, will give people a reason to say no in those conversations, or give people a reason to make an excuse of why this isn't the right time or this isn't the right way. And oftentimes it's because we're talking too much. So there is a benefit in silence too, I think.
Well stated. and I think it's something, that it can be learned, but it's not natural.
No.
And especially for somebody who has ideas such as you and many of us, and you want to get them out, as opposed to be focused. What I hear you saying here in summary also is be deliberate.
Very deliberate.
Know what you want, know what you're going to say. I love the deliberate idea that hit me is that you rehearse this. And it's a skill to develop about silence and know when to stop. One of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got from one of my mentors was Dan. It's the same thing, Adeela. He said, Dan, stop drilling once you hit oil.
It's true. It's true.
And I have trouble with it.
Yeah. Many of us do, I think.
Yeah. It's just, you're so into what you're doing. And anyway,
it's like, I think I took a negotiation class at Target, and I think it's one of the first things they teach you is be comfortable in silence, because it's an incredibly powerful negotiation tactic. It
is. And you'll get other people talking. And when they talk, you learn.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely.
It's very insightful. Adeela, this has been just
this has been so fun.
Delightful. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And for our viewers, on behalf of the Kelley School faculty and leadership team, we hope that you've enjoyed listening to Adeela's thoughts as much as at least I have and having the privilege to interview her and spend time with her this afternoon. So
thank you.
Again, thank you for joining us. Adeela, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And thanks for being such a great ambassador for the school.
Of course.
For Indiana University. We're so proud of what you're doing and just so honored to call you one of ours.
Oh,
so
that's kind.
thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's been so fun.
Care.
Thank you.